Welcome back to Review and Facts, the channel where we bring you the deepest and most detailed breakdowns of the movies you love. Today we are diving into one of the most important films in modern cinema history, a movie that changed the way superhero films were made forever. We are talking about The Avengers, released in the year 2012, a film that brought together some of the biggest superheroes in the world onto one single screen for the first time ever. This was not just another action movie. This was the beginning of a new era in Hollywood filmmaking, an era where interconnected storytelling across multiple films became the new standard. Before we get into the plot and the characters, let us first talk about where this movie came from and who was behind it. The Avengers was produced in the United States of America by Marvel Studios, and it was distributed worldwide by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. The film was written and directed by Joss Whedon, a filmmaker who was already well known and respected for his work in television and comic book storytelling long before he took on this massive project. Joss Whedon was handpicked by Marvel Studios because of his deep understanding of ensemble storytelling, meaning stories that focus on multiple characters at once rather than just a single hero. This skill became extremely important because The Avengers was not about one superhero saving the day. It was about 6 very different superheroes, each with their own personality, their own power, and their own ego, being forced to work together as a team. The movie is based on the Marvel Comics superhero team of the same name, which was originally created many decades earlier by the legendary comic book writer Stan Lee and artist Jack Kirby. The idea of taking these comic book characters and bringing them together in one live-action film was considered extremely risky at the time. No studio had ever attempted something on this scale before, where multiple superhero franchises, each with their own separate movies, would be combined into a single crossover event. Marvel Studios had been building toward this moment since the year 2008, when they released Iron Man, followed by The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, and Captain America, the First Avenger. Each of these films quietly planted the seeds for The Avengers, and audiences who paid close attention during the post-credit scenes of these earlier films could already sense that something bigger was coming. Now let us move into the overview of what this film is actually about. The Avengers tells the story of Earth's mightiest heroes coming together to stop a global threat that no single one of them could handle alone. The story begins when Loki, the adopted brother of Thor and a powerful being from the realm of Asgard, arrives on Earth with dangerous intentions. Loki steals a powerful and mysterious object known as the Tesseract, a cube-shaped item that holds immense cosmic energy, the kind of power that could be used to open a portal to other worlds or even to destroy entire cities if placed in the wrong hands. With this object in his possession, Loki plans to lead an alien army from another world into an invasion of Earth, with the ultimate goal of ruling over humanity as a god. Faced with a threat of this magnitude, Nick Fury, the director of a secretive government organization known as S.H.I.E.L.D, makes the decision to activate a long-dormant initiative. This initiative was designed to bring together a team of extraordinary individuals in case Earth ever faced a danger too large for any government or army to handle. This is where our team of heroes begins to form. Tony Stark, the genius billionaire who fights crime as Iron Man, is brought in for his technological brilliance and his unmatched confidence. Steve Rogers, known as Captain America, a soldier from the past who was frozen in ice during World War II and later revived in the present day, is called upon for his leadership and his unwavering sense of duty. Thor, the god of thunder from Asgard, joins the team not only to stop Loki's plan but also because Loki is his own brother, making this conflict deeply personal for him. Natasha Romanoff, known as Black Widow, a highly trained spy and assassin, brings stealth and strategy to the group. Clint Barton, known as Hawkeye, an expert marksman with unmatched precision, initially finds himself under Loki's mind control before eventually being freed and rejoining the team. And finally Bruce Banner, the brilliant scientist who transforms into the massive and uncontrollable Hulk whenever his emotions overwhelm him, joins the group as perhaps its most unpredictable and powerful member. As the story develops, these 6 individuals do not immediately work well together. In fact, one of the most compelling parts of the movie's plot is watching how much conflict, distrust, and clashing personalities exist between them before they can even begin to function as a real team. Tony Stark and Steve Rogers repeatedly disagree with each other, representing 2 very different generations and 2 very different philosophies of leadership. Thor struggles with the guilt of his brother's actions, while Bruce Banner constantly fears losing control of the Hulk in front of people he does not yet trust. This internal tension becomes just as important to the story as the external threat posed by Loki himself. A major turning point in the plot occurs when tragedy strikes within their own ranks, an event that forces the team to finally set aside their differences and unite for a common cause. This emotional moment becomes the true beginning of the Avengers as a real team, rather than just a group of individuals forced to work together. From this point forward, the film builds toward its massive final battle, which takes place in New York City. Loki successfully opens a portal above the city, allowing an alien army known as the Chitauri to pour through and begin their invasion. What follows is one of the most iconic action sequences in modern film history, as the 6 heroes fight side by side, each using their unique abilities to defend the city and its people. Iron Man flies through the skies taking down alien ships, Captain America coordinates the team on the ground like a true military commander, Thor unleashes the power of lightning against Loki and his forces, Black Widow and Hawkeye use precision and tactical skill to eliminate threats from a distance, and Hulk becomes an unstoppable force of destruction against the invading army. In the end, the team manages to close the portal and defeat Loki, saving New York City and the entire world from complete devastation. Now let us talk about the cast that brought these iconic characters to life on screen. Robert Downey Jr. plays Tony Stark, also known as Iron Man, bringing his now legendary blend of sharp wit, charm, and vulnerability to the role that had already made him a global superstar since 2008. Chris Evans plays Steve Rogers, also known as Captain America, portraying the character with a sense of old-fashioned honor and moral strength that contrasts beautifully with Stark's more modern and sarcastic personality. Chris Hemsworth plays Thor, bringing both physical power and emotional depth to a character who is torn between loyalty to his family and his duty to protect Earth. Mark Ruffalo takes on the role of Bruce Banner and the Hulk, becoming the actor most associated with this character in the years that followed, thanks to his ability to portray both quiet intelligence and explosive rage. Scarlett Johansson plays Natasha Romanoff, also known as Black Widow, bringing intensity and mystery to a character who often knows more than she lets on. Jeremy Renner plays Clint Barton, also known as Hawkeye, portraying a skilled and disciplined warrior who becomes a victim of manipulation before ultimately reclaiming his free will. Tom Hiddleston plays Loki, delivering one of the most memorable villain performances in the entire history of superhero cinema, combining charisma, menace, and tragic complexity in a way that made audiences both fear and sympathize with him. Samuel L. Jackson plays Nick Fury, the commanding and mysterious leader who brings the team together, while Kobe Smulders plays Agent Maria Hill, and Clark Gregg reprises his role as Agent Phil Coulson, a character whose fate in this film becomes one of the most emotionally significant moments of the entire story. The Avengers was officially released in theaters on May the 4th in the year 2012 in the United States, following an earlier international release that began in several countries in late April of that same year. The film was released under Marvel Studios and distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures, marking a massive moment not only for the studio but for the entire film industry. Upon release, the movie became an enormous commercial and critical success, breaking numerous box office records and proving that the shared universe concept, something Marvel had been carefully building for years, could actually work on a massive scale. It became one of the highest-grossing films of all time at that point, and it cemented the idea that superhero films could be both artistically respected and commercially dominant at the same time. If we look deeper into why this film works so well, it comes down to balance. Joss Whedon managed to give each character their own moment to shine, ensuring that no single hero overshadowed the others completely. The humor in the film feels natural rather than forced, the action sequences are grand without losing emotional weight, and the relationships between the characters feel genuine, built on believable conflict and eventual mutual respect. The film also succeeded because it did not rush the emotional stakes. It took the time to show why these characters struggled to trust each other before showing why they eventually became a family. This careful character work is often overlooked when people simply remember the film for its spectacular battle scenes. But it is truly the emotional foundation that made those battle scenes matter so much to audiences. The Avengers also holds a significant place in film history because it proved that the interconnected universe model, something considered financially risky and creatively difficult to manage, could actually succeed if executed with patience and vision. It inspired countless other studios to attempt similar shared universes in the years that followed, though very few managed to replicate the same level of success. The film's legacy extends far beyond its box office numbers. It changed audience expectations for what a superhero movie could be, and it set the stage for over a decade of interconnected storytelling that continues to shape the entertainment industry today. The Avengers, 2012, The Complete Story. Welcome back to Review and Facts. Today we are telling the complete story of The Avengers, the film that brought together Earth's mightiest heroes for the very first time. This is not just a summary. This is the full journey, told from beginning to end, capturing every major moment, every emotional beat, and every turning point that made this movie one of the most important films in modern Hollywood history. Sit back, because this is going to be a long and detailed telling of one of the greatest team-up stories ever put on screen. Our story begins far away from Earth, in the cold darkness of space, in a realm that exists beyond human understanding. There, a mysterious and immensely powerful being known as the Other kneels before an even more terrifying figure shrouded in shadow, a being whose presence radiates menace and ancient authority. This dark figure offers a proposition to someone waiting nearby, someone who has recently fallen from grace and who carries within him a burning desire for power, recognition, and revenge. That someone is Loki, a god from the realm of Asgard, the adopted brother of the mighty Thor. Loki has fallen to the void after the events that led to his downfall, and in his fall he has been found, reshaped, and given a new purpose by forces far darker than anything he encountered on Asgard. In exchange for retrieving a powerful artifact from Earth, Loki is promised command over an army capable of conquering entire worlds. Loki accepts. He is handed a scepter, an object humming with strange blue energy, a weapon that will soon become central to everything that unfolds. With this scepter in hand and a plan forming in his mind, Loki sets his sights on Earth, a planet he believes is ripe for conquest and a planet where he intends to prove that he is not the lesser son of Asgard, but a king in his own right. On Earth, deep within a secret research facility operated by the organization known as S.H.I.E.L.D., a team of scientists led by Dr. Eric Selvig is studying a strange and powerful object known as the Tesseract. This cube-shaped artifact hums with cosmic energy beyond human comprehension, energy capable of opening doorways between different points in the universe, even between entirely different realms of existence. Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., has come to personally oversee the situation because the Tesseract's energy readings have begun spiking unpredictably, and something about its behavior suggests that it may be reacting to an outside presence, as though something is trying to reach through it from the other side. Agent Phil Coulson, a calm and steady presence throughout the organization, briefs Fury on the situation as the facility buzzes with quiet tension. Agent Clint Barton, better known as Hawkeye, watches over the operation from a high vantage point, his sharp eyes trained on the Tesseract itself, sensing that something is about to go terribly wrong. And then, without warning, the Tesseract activates on its own. A blinding pulse of energy tears open a shimmering portal in the middle of the facility, And out of that portal steps Loki, calm, composed, and terrifyingly confident. He wastes no time. Using the scepter given to him, Loki touches the hearts of several people around him, including Eric Selvig and, most significantly, Clint Barton, and in doing so he takes control of their minds, turning trusted allies into obedient servants of his will. Nick Fury attempts to stop him, but Loki, now armed with his mind-controlled soldiers, easily overpowers the facility's defenses. In the chaos that follows, Loki seizes the Tesseract for himself, leaving the base in ruins behind him, brainwashed agents in his service, and Nick Fury standing amid the wreckage, realizing that Earth now faces a threat unlike anything S.H.I.E.L.D. has ever encountered. Understanding the scale of the danger now facing the planet, Nick Fury makes the decision to activate a long-dormant program known as the Avengers Initiative, a plan designed years earlier to bring together extraordinary individuals in the event that Earth faced a threat too large for any conventional army to handle. Fury knows that stopping Loki will require more than soldiers and weapons. It will require heroes. The first hero we return to is Tony Stark, the billionaire genius who moonlights as the armored hero Iron Man. Stark is found in his high-tech tower in New York City, living a life defined by confidence, brilliance, and more than a little arrogance. He is approached by Agent Coulson, who informs him that his participation in the Avengers Initiative is required, whether Stark personally agrees with the idea of teamwork or not. True to his personality, Stark is initially dismissive, more interested in reviewing classified files about the other individuals involved than in actually agreeing to help. But as he reads through the profiles of Bruce Banner, Steve Rogers, and Thor, a flicker of genuine curiosity begins to form beneath his sarcasm. He may not admit it openly, but Stark is intrigued by the idea of being part of something bigger than himself. Meanwhile, Steve Rogers, the soldier known as Captain America, is adjusting to a world that has moved on without him. Frozen in ice since the final days of World War II and only recently revived, Rogers finds modern society overwhelming and unfamiliar, filled with technology and cultural shifts he does not yet understand. When Agent Coulson arrives to recruit him, Rogers accepts almost immediately. Unlike Stark, Rogers does not need convincing. He was a soldier before, and in many ways he still is one. He simply needs a mission, and Fury has just given him one. At the same time, Natasha Romanoff, the deadly and highly skilled agent known as Black Widow, is completing an entirely separate assignment overseas, extracting information from dangerous criminals through calculated manipulation and combat skill. She is soon pulled away from her mission by Agent Coulson, who informs her that Clint Barton, her close friend and fellow agent, has been compromised, turned into an unwilling servant of Loki. This revelation strikes Natasha deeply, giving her a personal stake in the mission from the very beginning. She agrees to help locate Bruce Banner, the brilliant yet dangerous scientist who transforms into the monstrous Hulk whenever his emotions spiral out of control. Natasha travels to Kolkata, India, where Banner has been living quietly, working as a doctor and trying desperately to keep his inner rage suppressed. Banner has spent years running from his past, avoiding conflict and stress in an effort to prevent the Hulk from ever surfacing again. When Natasha finds him and explains the situation, Banner is understandably hesitant. He knows better than anyone how dangerous he can become, and he fears that joining a team fighting a cosmic threat could easily push him past his limits. Still, sensing the seriousness of the situation and perhaps hoping his scientific expertise can be put towards something meaningful, Banner agrees to help track down the Tesseract using his knowledge of gamma radiation. While these recruitments unfold across the globe, Thor, the god of thunder, arrives on Earth from Asgard, drawn by the knowledge that his brother Loki is responsible for the chaos beginning to spread. Thor's arrival is dramatic and immediate. He intercepts Loki's scepter-wielding agent, Clint Barton, and Eric Selvig during a tense confrontation, but more importantly, his arrival sets up a fateful and now iconic meeting with Tony Stark and Steve Rogers in the middle of a dense forest. What begins as a tense standoff between three powerful individuals, each unwilling to back down, quickly escalates into a full-blown battle, showcasing the raw power of each hero as thunder, repulsor blasts, and a mighty S.H.I.E.L.D. collide in the trees. The confrontation is eventually stopped, but it perfectly foreshadows the friction that will continue to challenge the team even after Loki is captured. With Loki eventually taken into custody and brought aboard the helicarrier, the massive flying aircraft carrier serving as S.H.I.E.L.D's primary base of operations, the team begins to properly assemble for the first time. But rather than immediately uniting as a cohesive group, tension quickly rises among them. Stark and Rogers clash over leadership and ideology, representing two very different generations and two very different approaches to heroism. Thor struggles internally, torn between his loyalty to his brother and his duty to stop him. Banner remains guarded, aware that everyone around him is quietly wondering whether he can be trusted, or whether he might lose control at any moment. Natasha watches everything carefully, trying to assess the risk each new variable brings to the mission. Even Nick Fury, normally composed and calculating, is forced to manage an increasingly volatile group of personalities, all while trying to figure out what Loki is truly planning. Loki, now imprisoned within a specially designed glass containment cell aboard the helicarrier, appears calm, almost amused by his captivity. He speaks with Fury, with Natasha, and eventually with Thor, using each conversation as an opportunity to manipulate, provoke, and study his captors. Loki reveals hints of his deeper motivations during these exchanges, touching on feelings of resentment, abandonment, and a desperate desire to prove his worth, not just to Asgard, but to himself. These conversations add emotional depth to what could have simply been a straightforward villain, painting Loki as a tragic figure whose thirst for power stems from long-buried insecurities and pain. As the team continues to investigate the situation, tension aboard the helicarrier reaches a boiling point. Bruce Banner, working alongside Stark to trace the Tesseract's energy signature, becomes increasingly uneasy as suspicion grows around him. A heated argument erupts among the team, fueled by mistrust, ego, and the immense pressure of the situation. In the middle of this chaos, it is revealed that one of Loki's brainwashed allies has infiltrated the ship, and in the confusion, gunfire breaks out. A stray injury causes Banner's anxiety to spike dangerously, and before anyone can stop it, Bruce Banner transforms into the Hulk, unleashing chaotic destruction throughout the helicarrier. The interior of the ship becomes a battlefield as Hulk rampages uncontrollably, forcing the other Avengers to attempt to contain him while simultaneously dealing with an engine failure caused by an external attack orchestrated by Loki's escaping agent. Thor attempts to confront the Hulk directly, leading to a brutal and visually spectacular clash between two of the most powerful beings on the team, further emphasizing just how volatile and dangerous this group truly is when working against each other instead of together. Meanwhile, Tony Stark and Steve Rogers scramble outside the ship to repair a damaged engine mid-flight, risking their lives while chaos unfolds inside. It is one of the most tense sequences in the film, showing that even without Loki directly present, the team is nearly torn apart by their own internal conflicts and vulnerabilities. Amid this disaster, Agent Phil Coulson, ever calm and dedicated, attempts to stop Loki from escaping his containment cell. In a heartbreaking and pivotal moment, Loki manages to overpower Coulson, striking him down with a fatal blow from his scepter. Before succumbing to his injuries, Coulson manages to fire a devastating weapon at Loki, momentarily proving that even a man without superpowers can still leave his mark on a god. Coulson's death becomes the emotional turning point of the entire film. When Nick Fury informs the team of Coulson's passing, the news hits each character differently, but collectively it forces them to confront the reality of what is truly at stake. Tony Stark, in particular, is deeply affected, beginning to understand that this fight is no longer just about proving himself or outsmarting a villain. It is about protecting people, and it is about the cost of failure. This moment becomes the true beginning of the Avengers as a real team. No longer defined by ego or personal doubt, each member begins to recognize the necessity of unity. Steve Rogers steps forward as a natural leader, organizing the group and reminding them that whatever their differences, they now share a common purpose. Slowly but surely, the fractured group begins to come together, motivated not just by duty, but by genuine grief and a shared desire for justice. Meanwhile, Loki, having successfully escaped the helicarrier and eliminated one of his greatest immediate threats, puts the next phase of his plan into motion. Using Dr. Selvig, who remains under his mental control, Loki begins constructing a massive machine capable of opening a stable portal above Stark Tower in New York City. This portal, once activated, will allow an enormous alien army from another world, known as the Chitauri, to pour through and begin a full-scale invasion of Earth. Loki chooses Stark Tower specifically, both for its central location within the city and for the symbolic power of using Tony Stark's own creation as the doorway to humanity's downfall. As the Avengers regroup and begin formulating their response, they quickly realize that time is running out. Loki appears publicly in Stuttgart, Germany, staging a dramatic and forceful display of dominance over a crowd of civilians, forcing them to kneel before him in a chilling demonstration of his belief that humanity was always meant to be ruled rather than free. It is during this public display that Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, and Thor confront Loki directly, ultimately capturing him and bringing him back into custody, though not without a fierce battle that highlights both Loki's cunning and the growing coordination between the heroes chasing him. Understanding that Loki intends to open a portal above New York City, the Avengers rush to stop the device before it becomes fully operational. However, by the time they arrive, it is already too late. The portal roars open above Stark Tower, and the sky itself begins to tear apart as the Chitauri army begins its invasion, descending upon the city in overwhelming numbers, riding strange flying vehicles and unleashing destructive energy weapons upon the streets below. What follows is the film's now legendary climax, the Battle of New York, one of the most iconic action sequences in modern cinematic history. The Avengers, now fully united as a team for the first time, spread across the city to defend it from complete destruction. Iron Man takes to the skies, engaging the alien fleet directly while providing aerial support and coordinating strategic strikes from above. Captain America commands the ground battle with military precision, directing civilians to safety while organizing local police forces to help contain the chaos. Thor uses his mastery over lightning and thunder to devastate waves of enemy forces, all while keeping a wary eye on his brother, hoping deep down that there might still be a way to reach him. Black Widow and Hawkeye combine stealth, precision, and tactical intelligence to eliminate threats with calculated efficiency, working almost seamlessly together despite the earlier control Loki once had over Hawkeye's mind. And then there is the Hulk, who arrives dramatically in the middle of the battle, no longer a liability but now a devastating weapon fighting on the side of humanity, smashing through Chitauri forces with unstoppable strength. Throughout the battle, the team demonstrates a level of coordination and trust that was completely absent earlier in the story. Every hero plays to their strengths, covering each other's weaknesses, adapting to the ever-changing chaos of urban warfare against an alien invasion. It becomes clear that this is no longer a group of individuals forced together by circumstance. This is now a true team, working in harmony toward a singular goal, protecting the city and its people no matter the cost. As the battle rages on, the situation grows increasingly dire. The Chitauri forces continue pouring through the portal in overwhelming numbers, and it becomes evident that even the combined might of the Avengers may not be enough to stop the invasion entirely. In a desperate and urgent moment, it is revealed that a nuclear missile has been launched toward the city by a government council attempting to eliminate the threat entirely, unaware or unwilling to consider the massive civilian casualties such an action would cause. Understanding the catastrophic consequences of allowing the missile to strike New York, Tony Stark makes a heroic and self-sacrificing decision. He intercepts the missile himself, redirecting it through the portal and into the heart of the invading alien fleet on the other side, hoping to destroy their source and end the invasion once and for all. This decision comes at an enormous personal risk, as Stark has no guarantee he will survive the journey or make it back through the closing portal in time. As the missile detonates on the other side, devastating the Chitauri forces at their source, the portal begins to close, threatening to trap Stark on the other side forever. In one of the most emotionally powerful moments of the entire film, Stark's suit runs out of power just as he begins falling back toward Earth, unconscious and lifeless, plummeting toward the city below. It is Hulk who ultimately catches him, saving his life at the very last possible moment, delivering him safely to the ground as the rest of the team gathers around, uncertain whether Stark has survived. In a moment of genuine tension and emotional weight, the team waits anxiously to see if Stark will wake up. When he finally does, disoriented but very much alive, the relief among the team is palpable, further reinforcing just how far they have come since the beginning of the story, when this same group of individuals could barely stand to be in the same room together. With the alien invasion defeated and Loki's plan in ruins, the remaining Chitauri forces on Earth collapse, their connection to their leadership severed by the destruction on the other side of the portal. Loki himself, cornered and depleted, is ultimately defeated once again, this time by the Hulk in a brief but memorable confrontation that leaves the once proud and confident villain humbled and physically overwhelmed. In the aftermath of the battle, the city lies in ruins, but it has been saved. The Avengers stand together amid the wreckage, a group forever changed by what they have endured. Loki is taken into custody once again, this time to be returned to Asgard by Thor to face judgment for his crimes, both on Earth and within his own realm. Before departing, there is a quiet and reflective moment between Thor and Tony Stark, a brief acknowledgement of mutual respect built through the trials they have faced together. As the story draws to a close, we see glimpses of the team beginning to move on, each returning to their own lives, yet forever connected by what they have experienced together. Nick Fury reflects on the aftermath of the battle, acknowledging that while the immediate threat has been dealt with, the world has now been permanently changed. Humanity is no longer alone in the universe, and the existence of powerful and dangerous forces beyond Earth is now an undeniable reality. This realization sets the stage for a new kind of world, one where extraordinary threats require extraordinary protectors, and where this newly formed team, however unconventional and difficult they may be with one another, may need to remain ready for whatever comes next. In the quiet moments following the battle, we see each member of the team dealing with the aftermath in their own personal way. Tony Stark, still recovering from his near-fatal fall, returns to his life as Iron Man with a renewed sense of purpose, no longer just a man seeking validation through his intelligence and wealth, but someone who has now experienced true sacrifice and the weight of protecting others beyond himself. Steve Rogers, who spent the film adjusting to a world he barely recognized, finds a strange sense of belonging within this newly formed team, discovering that perhaps his purpose in this modern era is not so different from the purpose he once had decades before. He has found new comrades to fight alongside, even if this new world remains unfamiliar to him in many other ways. Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton, having endured the trauma of Loki's mind control and the emotional toll it placed on their partnership, begin to rebuild the trust between them, their bond as friends and colleagues now strengthened rather than broken by what they endured. Bruce Banner, who spent so much of his life fearing the Hulk and running from the destruction he believed he was destined to cause, experiences something entirely new by the end of this story, a sense of acceptance. For the first time, Banner sees the Hulk not purely as a curse, but as a power that, when controlled and directed with purpose, can be used to protect rather than destroy. This shift in his perspective becomes one of the most quietly powerful character arcs of the entire film. Thor, meanwhile, carries the heaviest emotional burden as he prepares to return to Asgard with Loki in custody. Despite everything his brother has done, despite the destruction, the manipulation, and the loss of life caused by his actions, Thor still holds on to a flicker of hope that Loki is not entirely beyond redemption. Their relationship, marked by rivalry, love, jealousy, and deep-rooted pain, remains unresolved as the film ends, setting the stage for future stories still to come. Before departing Earth, Thor uses the Tesseract to open a portal back to Asgard, taking Loki with him to face judgment for his crimes, leaving the remaining Avengers behind to continue protecting Earth on their own. As the dust settles over New York City, we see Nick Fury delivering a final report to the shadowy council that oversees S.H.I.E.L.D's operations, individuals who had earlier attempted to handle the crisis through more drastic and destructive means. Fury defends the Avengers' initiative, insisting that despite their flaws, their egos, and their unconventional methods, this team represents something the world now desperately needs, a group capable of standing against threats that ordinary military forces simply cannot handle. It becomes clear that although this mission has ended, the story of the Avengers as a team is only just beginning. In a final and now iconic scene, we find the team sitting together in near silence, exhausted from the battle, gathered around a table sharing a quiet meal in the ruins of the city they just saved. There is no dramatic dialogue, no grand speeches, just a group of extraordinary individuals finally allowing themselves a moment of peace after everything they have endured together. This simple, understated ending speaks volumes about how far these characters have come, from strangers who nearly tore each other apart out of distrust and ego, to a team bonded by shared sacrifice and mutual respect. The story of the Avengers ultimately serves as more than just a tale of alien invasion and superhero spectacle. At its heart, it is a story about unity, about setting aside personal pride for the sake of a greater purpose, and about finding strength not through individual power, but through collective trust and cooperation. Each character enters this story flawed, isolated, or burdened by their own personal struggles, and each character leaves transformed by the experience of fighting alongside others who understand sacrifice in ways very few people ever will. This is the complete story of the Avengers, a film that not only saved the world within its own narrative, but also reshaped the entire landscape of modern Hollywood filmmaking, proving that shared universes and interconnected storytelling could captivate audiences on a scale never seen before. The Avengers, 2012, Complete Cast Life Histories. Welcome back to Review and Facts. In this video, we are taking a deep and detailed look into the lives of the actors who brought the characters of the Avengers to life. Before they became household names playing gods, super soldiers, and armored geniuses, each of these performers walked their own long and often difficult road through the entertainment industry. Today we explore their journeys, from their early lives to the moment they stepped into these now iconic roles. We begin with Robert Downey Jr., the man who brought Tony Stark, also known as Iron Man, to life with a performance that many consider one of the greatest examples of an actor becoming inseparable from his character. Robert Downey Jr. was born in April of 1965 in Manhattan, New York, into a family already deeply connected to the world of film and entertainment. His father, Robert Downey Sr., was an underground filmmaker known for his unconventional and experimental movies, and young Robert was exposed to the world of acting from an extremely early age, making his first film appearance as a child in one of his father's productions. Growing up surrounded by artists, actors, and the chaotic energy of independent filmmaking gave Downey a natural comfort in front of the camera, but it also exposed him early to a lifestyle that would later contribute to some of the darkest years of his life. As a teenager, Downey moved between New York and California, eventually dropping out of high school to pursue acting full-time, determined to make his mark in Hollywood. Throughout the 1980s, Downey built a steady career, appearing in various films and eventually joining the cast of Saturday Night Live, where his comedic timing and charisma began to attract wider attention. His breakout dramatic role came in 1992, when he portrayed the legendary silent film comedian Charlie Chaplin in a biographical film, a performance so committed and transformative that it earned him a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Actor. At this point in his career, Downey was widely regarded as one of the most talented actors of his generation, someone capable of blending comedy, drama, and vulnerability in a way few of his peers could match. However, behind the scenes, Downey was struggling with severe substance abuse issues that had begun in his childhood, influenced heavily by his exposure to drugs at a young age within his own household. Throughout the 1990s and into the early 2000s, Downey's career became overshadowed by his personal struggles. He was arrested multiple times, spent time in prison, and cycled in and out of rehabilitation programs, becoming something of a cautionary tale within the industry rather than the celebrated talent he once was. Many in Hollywood considered him uninsurable, meaning studios were unwilling to hire him due to the financial risk associated with his unpredictable behavior. It seemed, for a period of years, that Downey's immense talent would remain forever overshadowed by his personal battles. However, Downey eventually achieved sobriety through sustained effort and support, slowly rebuilding his reputation through smaller supporting roles that reminded the industry of his exceptional skill. The turning point in Downey's career came when Marvel Studios, then a relatively unproven entity attempting to produce its own films independently rather than licensing characters to other studios, took a significant gamble by casting him as Tony Stark in the 2008 film Iron Man. Director Jon Favreau fought hard to cast Downey, believing that his personal history of struggle and redemption made him uniquely suited to portray a character who is himself deeply flawed, arrogant, and eventually transformed through hardship. This decision proved to be one of the most important casting choices in modern film history. Downey's portrayal of Tony Stark became inseparable from his own personal narrative of falling from grace and clawing his way back to success, and audiences responded to this authenticity in a way that turned both the character and the actor into global icons. By the time The Avengers was released in 2012, Downey had become the face of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, commanding immense respect both in front of and behind the camera, often contributing creative input into how his character was written and portrayed. Next we turn to Chris Evans, the actor who portrayed Steve Rogers, also known as Captain America. Chris Evans was born in June of 1981 in Boston, Massachusetts, and grew up in a close-knit family that strongly valued creativity and performance. Both of his parents were involved in the arts in some capacity, and Evans developed an early passion for acting through his participation in local theater productions during his childhood and teenage years. After graduating from high school, Evans moved to New York City to pursue acting professionally, quickly finding work in television before transitioning into film roles during the early 2000s. Evans became widely recognized in the mid-2000s for his roles in various action and comedy films, often being typecast as the confident, charming, somewhat brash young leading man. One of his most notable early roles was playing Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, in a separate superhero franchise based on Marvel's Fantastic Four characters. Interestingly, this earlier experience playing a Marvel character would later work both for and against him when Marvel Studios approached him about the role of Captain America years later. Evans has openly discussed his hesitation in accepting the role, expressing concern about the immense pressure and long-term commitment that came with playing such an iconic and central superhero character. Unlike some of his co-stars, Evans has spoken candidly about experiencing anxiety related to fame and public attention, making his decision to take on such a massive franchise role a particularly difficult one. Despite his hesitation, Evans ultimately accepted the role of Steve Rogers, debuting as Captain America in the 2011 film Captain America: The First Avenger. His portrayal of the character emphasized old-fashioned decency, quiet strength, and unwavering moral conviction, qualities that stood in deliberate contrast to the more modern and cynical personalities of characters like Tony Stark. By the time The Avengers arrived in 2012, Evans had fully embodied the role, bringing both physical presence and emotional sincerity to a character who often serves as the moral center of the entire team. Evans would go on to become one of the most recognizable faces in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, closely associated with the character of Captain America for over a decade of filmmaking. Now we move to Chris Hemsworth, the Australian actor who brought Thor, the God of Thunder, to life on screen. Chris Hemsworth was born in August of 1983 in Melbourne, Australia, and spent much of his early childhood moving between different parts of the country due to his father's work, eventually settling for a period of time in a remote part of northern Australia. Hemsworth grew up alongside his brothers, Luke and Liam, both of whom would also eventually pursue careers in acting, making the Hemsworth family one of the more notable acting families to emerge from Australia in recent decades. Hemsworth began his acting career in Australian television, appearing in various local productions before landing a long-running role on a popular Australian soap opera, which helped establish his presence within the domestic entertainment industry. Seeking to expand his career internationally, Hemsworth eventually moved to Los Angeles to pursue opportunities in American film and television, a transition that proved challenging at first, as he faced numerous rejections before finding his breakthrough role. Interestingly, Hemsworth had a brief but notable appearance in the 2009 science fiction film Star Trek, playing the father of the film's lead character in an opening sequence that, despite its brevity, left a strong impression on audiences and casting directors alike. His true breakthrough came when Marvel Studios cast him as Thor, a role that required not only significant physical transformation but also the ability to portray a character caught between godlike power and very human emotional struggles, particularly his complicated relationship with his adopted brother Loki. Hemsworth committed himself fully to the physical demands of the role, undergoing intense training to embody the larger-than-life presence of an Asgardian warrior. His performance in the 2011 film Thor introduced audiences to a character who was initially arrogant and reckless before undergoing significant personal growth, a journey that continued to develop throughout the Avengers and beyond. Hemsworth's natural charisma, combined with his willingness to inject humor into an otherwise serious character, helped make Thor one of the most beloved and enduring figures within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Turning now to Mark Ruffalo, the actor who portrayed Bruce Banner and the Hulk, we find a career built on a foundation of patience, persistence, and dedication to the craft of acting long before mainstream recognition arrived. Mark Ruffalo was born in November of 1967 in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and moved frequently during his childhood as his family relocated to different parts of the United States. Ruffalo developed an interest in acting during his teenage years and eventually moved to Los Angeles to study at a respected acting conservatory, immersing himself deeply in method acting techniques and theatrical training rather than pursuing quick commercial success. For much of the 1990s, Ruffalo struggled to find consistent work, taking on odd jobs to support himself while auditioning relentlessly for roles that often did not materialize. During this period, Ruffalo also faced a serious health crisis when a brain tumor was discovered, requiring surgery that temporarily left him with partial facial paralysis, a condition that took considerable time and effort to overcome. Despite these significant personal and professional challenges, Ruffalo remained committed to acting, eventually gaining recognition throughout the early 2000s for his work in independent and critically acclaimed films, often portraying complex, emotionally grounded characters that showcased his talent for nuanced, understated performances. When Marvel Studios sought to recast the role of Bruce Banner for the Avengers, having previously featured different actors in earlier films, they turned to Ruffalo, drawn to his ability to convey quiet internal struggle alongside barely contained intensity, qualities perfectly suited to a character defined by his attempt to suppress overwhelming rage. Ruffalo's approach to the role emphasized Banner's intelligence, vulnerability, and reluctant heroism, creating a version of the character that resonated deeply with audiences and critics alike. His performance in The Avengers is often credited with finally cracking the difficult challenge of successfully translating the Hulk character to modern cinema after previous attempts had struggled to strike the right balance between the human and monstrous sides of the character. We now turn to Scarlett Johansson, who portrayed Natasha Romanoff, also known as Black Widow. Scarlett Johansson was born in November of 1984 in Manhattan, New York, into a family with a background in architecture and homemaking, and she began acting professionally at a remarkably young age, appearing in her first film role as a child. Johansson quickly demonstrated a maturity and screen presence well beyond her years, earning critical acclaim throughout her adolescence for a series of performances that showcased unusual depth and emotional intelligence for such a young actor. By her late teenage years and early 20s, Johansson had firmly established herself as one of the most respected young actors of her generation, appearing in a wide range of critically acclaimed films that spanned drama, comedy, and independent cinema. Her transition into blockbuster action filmmaking came when Marvel Studios cast her as Natasha Romanoff, introducing the character in the 2010 film Iron Man 2. This casting represented a significant shift in her career, moving from primarily dramatic and independent projects into the world of large-scale action franchises, a transition that ultimately proved enormously successful both for Johansson personally and for the franchise as a whole. Johansson brought a combination of physical intensity and emotional restraint to Black Widow, portraying a character defined by a mysterious and often troubled past, someone who uses composure and control as armor against deep personal trauma. Her performance in The Avengers helped establish Natasha Romanoff as one of the most compelling and complex characters within the ensemble, despite the character not possessing any of the superhuman abilities held by her teammates. Johansson would go on to become one of the most recognizable and highest-paid actresses in the world, with Black Widow remaining one of the defining roles of her career for well over a decade. Next we look at Jeremy Renner, who portrayed Clint Barton, also known as Hawkeye. Jeremy Renner was born in January of 1971 in Modesto, California, and initially pursued studies in computer science and criminology before discovering a passion for acting somewhat by accident, after enrolling in a drama class to fulfill a general education requirement during his time in college. This unexpected discovery redirected the course of his life entirely, leading him to abandon his original academic path in favor of pursuing acting seriously. For much of the 1990s and early 2000s, Renner worked steadily but largely outside the spotlight, taking on smaller roles in independent films and television while building his craft. His significant breakthrough came in 2008 with his lead performance in a critically acclaimed war drama, a role that earned him widespread recognition and his first Academy Award nomination, finally establishing him as a serious and respected talent within the industry after years of relatively unnoticed work. This breakthrough performance directly led to increased visibility that eventually brought him to the attention of Marvel Studios. Renner was cast as Clint Barton, making a brief appearance in the 2011 film Thor before taking on a more substantial role in The Avengers. Renner approached the character with a grounded, understated intensity, portraying Hawkeye as a highly skilled and disciplined professional whose greatest strength lies not in superhuman ability but in precision, focus, and unwavering reliability. The character's arc within The Avengers, particularly his manipulation under Loki's control and his subsequent redemption, gave Renner the opportunity to explore themes of guilt and recovery, adding emotional weight to a character who might otherwise have been overshadowed by his more overtly powerful teammates. We now turn to Tom Hiddleston, the actor behind one of the most beloved villains in modern cinematic history, Loki. Tom Hiddleston was born in February of 1981 in Westminster, London, into a family with a strong academic background. Hiddleston pursued a rigorous classical education, eventually studying at Cambridge University before continuing his training at a prestigious drama academy in London, giving him a deeply theatrical and classically trained foundation that would later distinguish his approach to acting from many of his Hollywood contemporaries. Before achieving mainstream recognition, Hiddleston built a career primarily within British theatre and television, earning respect within those circles for his versatility and commitment to character work. His path to the role of Loki came through a somewhat unconventional route, having initially auditioned for the role of Thor before director Kenneth Branagh recognized qualities in his audition better suited to the character of Loki instead. This redirection proved to be an extraordinarily fortunate turn of events, as Hiddleston's portrayal of Loki quickly became one of the most celebrated villain performances of the modern superhero genre. Hiddleston approached Loki not as a simple antagonist, but as a deeply wounded and complex individual driven by feelings of inadequacy, jealousy, and a desperate need for validation, particularly in relation to his brother Thor and his father Odin. This nuanced approach transformed Loki from a one-dimensional villain into one of the most sympathetic and compelling characters within the entire franchise, earning Hiddleston immense popularity among audiences who found themselves drawn to the character's tragic complexity despite his villainous actions. His performance in the Avengers further cemented this dynamic, showcasing both Loki's manipulative cunning and the underlying vulnerability that made the character so enduringly popular. Now we turn to Samuel L. Jackson, who portrayed Nick Fury, the enigmatic and commanding director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Samuel L. Jackson was born in December of 1948 in Washington, D.C., though he was raised primarily in Chattanooga, Tennessee, by his mother and extended family. Jackson attended Morehouse College, where he became involved in civil rights activism during a particularly turbulent period in American history, an experience that shaped his worldview significantly before he eventually turned his focus fully toward acting. Jackson spent many years working in theater and taking on smaller film roles throughout the 1970s and 1980s, often struggling with personal difficulties, including substance abuse issues that he later overcame through sustained recovery efforts. His major breakthrough came in the early 1990s, particularly through his collaboration with acclaimed filmmaker Spike Lee and later through his unforgettable performance in a highly influential crime film released in 1994, which earned him widespread critical acclaim and an Academy Award nomination. From that point forward, Jackson became one of the most prolific and recognizable actors in Hollywood, known for his commanding screen presence and distinctive delivery. Jackson's connection to the role of Nick Fury actually predates his formal casting in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as the character had been visually redesigned in the comic books specifically to resemble Jackson years before he was officially cast in the role, a rare and unusual instance of life imitating art before art eventually caught up with reality. Jackson brought gravitas, authority, and a commanding presence to the role, serving as the connective figure who oversees and orchestrates the formation of the Avengers as a team, appearing across numerous films within the franchise as one of its most consistent and central figures. Finally, we look briefly at Clark Gregg and Cobie Smulders, two performers whose contributions, while smaller in scale compared to their superhero co-stars, played significant roles in grounding the story emotionally. Clark Gregg, born in April of 1962 in Boston, Massachusetts, built a career as a respected character actor and writer long before joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe, bringing warmth, dry humor, and quiet dedication to the role of Agent Phil Coulson, a character whose fate in the Avengers became one of the most emotionally impactful moments of the entire film. Cobie Smulders, born in April of 1982 in Vancouver, Canada, had already achieved significant popularity through her role in a long-running American television comedy series before taking on the role of Agent Maria Hill, bringing sharp professionalism and quiet strength to her portrayal of one of S.H.I.E.L.D's most capable officers. Together, these actors, each carrying their own unique journey through struggle, persistence, and eventual triumph, came together to create one of the most beloved ensembles in modern film history. Their individual stories of hardship and perseverance mirror, in many ways, the very themes explored within the Avengers itself, stories of imperfect individuals finding strength through unity and shared purpose. The Avengers, 2012, budget, making of, and behind-the-scenes fun. Welcome back to Review and Facts. Today we are pulling back the curtain on the Avengers, exploring how this massive film was actually made, what it cost to bring to the screen, and some of the lighter, funnier moments that happened behind the scenes while the cast and crew worked to create one of the most important superhero films of all time. Big blockbuster productions are often remembered only for what audiences see in the final cut, but the process of making a film like this involved months of planning, enormous financial investment, technical challenges, and plenty of moments of genuine laughter and camaraderie among a cast that would eventually become one of the most beloved ensembles in modern cinema. Let us begin with the financial side of the production, because The Avengers was, at the time of its release, one of the most ambitious and expensive projects Marvel Studios had ever attempted. Bringing together 6 major superheroes, each with their own established fanbase and their own visual and narrative requirements, into a single cohesive film required an enormous budget, reportedly falling somewhere in the range of $220 million, though some estimates that include marketing and promotional costs pushed the overall investment considerably higher. This was a substantial gamble for Marvel Studios, a company that, despite the earlier success of individual films like Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America, had never attempted anything on this scale before. Combining multiple franchises into one story meant that failure was not just a financial risk for a single film, but a potential threat to the entire interconnected universe Marvel had been carefully building since 2008. A significant portion of this budget went toward visual effects, which were absolutely essential to bringing characters like the Hulk, Thor, and the alien Chitauri army to life in a way that felt believable and immersive. Unlike smaller, more grounded films, The Avengers required extensive computer-generated environments, especially for its climactic battle sequence set in New York City, where an entire portion of the city needed to be digitally recreated and then destroyed on a massive scale. The visual effects teams worked for months constructing digital models of city streets, buildings, and aerial battle sequences, blending practical filming with digital enhancement to create a sense of scale that felt both spectacular and grounded in reality. The Hulk in particular required an enormous amount of technical work, as the studio wanted to avoid the visual shortcomings of earlier cinematic attempts at the character. Mark Ruffalo's performance was captured using motion capture technology, allowing his facial expressions and physical movements to be translated directly onto the character's digital model, giving the Hulk a level of emotional nuance that had not been achieved in previous film adaptations. Beyond visual effects, a substantial part of the budget also went toward practical set construction, elaborate costume design, and location shooting across multiple countries. Rather than relying entirely on digital environments, the production team built extensive practical sets to give the actors real physical spaces to interact with, believing that grounding the performances in tangible environments would enhance the authenticity of the final film. Costume design also played a major financial and creative role, as each hero's suit needed to be both visually striking and physically functional for the demanding action sequences required throughout filming. Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man suit, for example, involved intricate detailing and required careful engineering to allow for both visual accuracy and enough mobility for Downey to perform many of his own physical sequences. Principal photography for the Avengers took place primarily in Albuquerque, New Mexico, as well as in Cleveland, Ohio, which was transformed through extensive set dressing and digital enhancement to stand in for New York City during the film's climactic battle sequences. Cleveland was chosen partly for practical financial reasons, as filming in Ohio allowed the production to take advantage of local tax incentives, significantly reducing costs compared to filming directly in New York. The city's downtown area was closed off for extended periods, with entire streets transformed to resemble Manhattan, complete with rubble, debris, and elaborate practical effects designed to simulate the aftermath of an alien invasion. Local residents in Cleveland became accustomed to seeing streets filled with fake destruction, alien-themed set dressing, and, on more than one occasion, actors in full costume wandering between takes, creating a surreal atmosphere throughout the city during the shoot. One of the most significant challenges directors and writers faced during the making of this film was balancing the needs of 6 major characters, each with their own established fanbase, personality, and narrative arc, within a single cohesive story. Joss Whedon, who wrote and directed the film, has spoken extensively about the difficulty of giving every character meaningful material without allowing any single hero to overshadow the rest of the team. This challenge extended beyond just screenwriting into the actual physical logistics of scheduling, as coordinating the availability of such a large ensemble cast, many of whom had their own separate film commitments, required incredibly precise planning throughout the production schedule. Despite these significant challenges, or perhaps partly because of them, the set of the Avengers became known for an atmosphere of genuine camaraderie, playful competitiveness, and frequent laughter among the cast members, many of whom developed close personal friendships that extended well beyond the film itself. Robert Downey Jr., known for his quick wit and tendency toward improvisation, quickly became something of a ringleader on set, often deviating from the written script to add spontaneous jokes and reactions that ended up making their way into the final film. Several of Tony Stark's most memorable lines throughout the movie were either heavily improvised or significantly altered from their original scripted versions, a testament to Downey's comfort with the character and his instinct for comedic timing. Whedon has spoken about how he often allowed space during filming specifically for Downey to experiment with dialogue, trusting his instincts as an actor who by that point had fully inhabited the character across multiple films. Chris Evans, playing the more serious and disciplined Captain America, often found himself on the receiving end of playful teasing from his co-stars, particularly regarding his character's old-fashioned mannerisms and formal way of speaking compared to the more modern personalities surrounding him. Evans has spoken in interviews about how the cast would often joke about Steve Rogers being hopelessly out of touch, using this dynamic as a source of ongoing humor throughout filming, with actors improvising small moments of confusion or unfamiliarity for Rogers whenever the scene allowed for it. Despite this good-natured teasing, Evans has also described genuine warmth among the cast, noting that many of the friendships formed on set felt authentic rather than performative, largely because the actors spent so much time together both during filming and during promotional events surrounding the film. Chris Hemsworth, tasked with portraying the powerful and larger-than-life Thor, often found himself dealing with the physical challenges of his elaborate costume and iconic hammer, which, despite appearing lightweight on screen, was actually quite heavy and cumbersome to carry and swing repeatedly throughout long filming days. Hemsworth has spoken humorously about the physical toll of wielding the hammer prop for extended action sequences, joking that maintaining an appearance of effortless strength while secretly struggling with an awkward and heavy prop became something of a personal challenge throughout filming. His thick Australian accent, which he intentionally suppressed in favor of a more formal, almost Shakespearean tone for the character, also became a frequent source of amusement on set, with fellow cast members occasionally encouraging him to slip into his natural accent between takes purely for entertainment purposes. Mark Ruffalo, taking on the challenging dual role of Bruce Banner and the Hulk, brought a notably calm and grounded energy to the set, which stood in interesting contrast to the volatile nature of his character. Ruffalo has spoken about how the motion capture process required for the Hulk sequences involved wearing a specialized suit covered in tracking markers, often performing scenes in a nearly empty room while imagining the massive scale and destructive movements his digital counterpart would eventually have. This process, while technically demanding, also led to several amusing moments on set, as Ruffalo would perform exaggerated physical movements meant to translate into the Hulk's massive digital presence, often to the amusement of nearby crew members who would watch him leap, stomp, and roar in an otherwise ordinary-looking motion capture suit. Scarlett Johansson, portraying the highly trained and physically demanding role of Black Widow, underwent extensive combat and stunt training in preparation for the film, working closely with the stunt team to ensure her fight sequences appeared fluid, powerful, and believable. Johansson has discussed the physical intensity of this preparation, noting that the demands of playing a character without superhuman abilities meant relying almost entirely on physical skill and precise choreography rather than special effects to convey her character's strength and combat expertise. Despite the intensity of this training, Johansson has also spoken fondly of the collaborative and supportive atmosphere among the cast, describing a set where actors frequently checked in on one another during physically demanding sequences, offering encouragement and camaraderie throughout the grueling shooting schedule. Jeremy Renner, playing the sharp-eyed marksman Hawkeye, faced a particularly unique challenge in that a significant portion of his character's role in the film required him to portray someone under mind control for much of the story, limiting his ability to interact naturally with the rest of the cast until much later in filming. Renner has spoken about how this created an interesting dynamic on set, as he often found himself physically present during group scenes but performing a much more subdued, emotionally distant version of his character, only fully engaging with the ensemble's more light-hearted, easygoing energy once Hawkeye's arc allowed for it later in the story. Tom Hiddleston, portraying the cunning and manipulative villain Loki, became known throughout the production for his commitment to fully embodying the character even between takes, often remaining in character during breaks in filming to maintain the intensity and presence required for his performance. Despite playing a villain, Hiddleston developed a reputation among his co-stars for being remarkably warm, gracious, and enthusiastic off-camera, a stark contrast to the cold, calculating persona he brought to Loki. Several of his co-stars have spoken humorously about how disarming it was to interact with Hiddleston between scenes, given how convincingly menacing he appeared once cameras began rolling. One frequently discussed anecdote from the production involves a scene requiring Loki to be forcefully tackled and subdued during the film's climactic battle, a sequence that required numerous takes and significant physical effort from Hiddleston, who has spoken with good humor about the exhausting yet oddly comedic experience of being repeatedly, dramatically pinned to the ground for the camera. Samuel L. Jackson, bringing his commanding presence to the role of Nick Fury, was known throughout the production for his professionalism and efficiency, often completing his scenes with remarkable speed and precision due to his extensive experience within the industry. Despite his serious on-screen presence, Jackson has spoken about enjoying the lighter, more relaxed atmosphere among the younger members of the ensemble cast, occasionally joining in on their playful banter between takes, offering both mentorship and camaraderie to a group of actors who, despite their individual fame, were still adjusting to the unique pressures of working within such a large-scale ensemble production. One of the most widely discussed and beloved moments from the entire production process actually occurred after principal photography had officially concluded. During post-production, Joss Whedon wrote and filmed an additional scene featuring the entire team sitting together in near silence, eating shawarma in the aftermath of the massive battle that concludes the film. This now iconic scene, which plays during the film's mid-credits sequence, was filmed quickly and somewhat informally after the main shoot had wrapped, with the cast reportedly enjoying the relaxed, almost improvisational atmosphere of filming a scene with minimal dialogue, simply reacting naturally to sitting together, exhausted, in character. Cast members have spoken fondly of this particular day of filming, describing it as a light-hearted and fitting way to close out the production, allowing the actors one final opportunity to interact with one another in character before the film's release. Throughout the production, the cast frequently participated in group interviews and press events together, during which their genuine chemistry and playful dynamic became increasingly apparent to audiences and journalists alike. This off-screen camaraderie played a significant role in shaping public perception of the Avengers as a believable team, as audiences could sense that the friendships and rapport visible on screen were not purely the result of skilled acting, but were genuinely reflective of the relationships these actors had built with one another throughout the demanding production process. The making of the Avengers also involved significant technical innovation, particularly in how the film's massive battle sequence was constructed and filmed. Given the sheer scale of coordinating 6 superheroes fighting simultaneously across a sprawling, partially digital cityscape, the production team had to develop detailed visual planning and pre-visualization techniques, essentially creating rough digital versions of major action sequences before actual filming began, allowing directors and stunt coordinators to map out complex choreography in advance. This process required close collaboration between the visual effects team, stunt coordinators, and the actors themselves, ensuring that practical stunt work could be seamlessly integrated with digital effects during post-production. Joss Whedon has often spoken about the immense pressure he felt directing a film of this scale, particularly given the expectations of both fans and the studio itself. Having built much of his earlier career in television, where budgets and scale were considerably smaller, Whedon has described the transition to directing a blockbuster of this magnitude as both exhilarating and daunting. Despite this pressure, Whedon maintained a reputation on set for his sharp, witty sense of humor, often keeping the mood light even during particularly stressful or technically demanding days of filming. Cast members have frequently praised his ability to balance the seriousness of directing such an enormous production with genuine warmth and humor, creating an environment where actors felt comfortable experimenting and contributing creatively to their characters. Another frequently discussed aspect of the production involved the physical demands placed on the cast throughout filming, particularly during the lengthy and complex battle sequence that concludes the film. Many of the actors have spoken about the exhausting nature of filming action-heavy sequences over multiple weeks, often performing similar physical movements repeatedly from different camera angles to allow editors the flexibility needed during post-production. Despite the physical exhaustion this process often caused, cast members have also described these weeks of intensive action filming as some of the most bonding experiences of the entire production, as the shared physical challenge brought the ensemble closer together, creating inside jokes and shared experiences that carried over into their public appearances and future collaborations within the franchise. The film's premiere and subsequent press tour further highlighted the genuine camaraderie built throughout production, as the cast traveled together across multiple countries promoting the film, participating in interviews, and interacting with fans at large-scale promotional events. These experiences allowed the actors to continue building on the relationships formed during filming, further solidifying the sense of genuine friendship that audiences had already begun to sense from the film itself. Ultimately, the making of the Avengers represented an enormous financial and creative gamble for Marvel Studios, one that required not only a massive monetary investment but also careful, thoughtful collaboration among a large and talented ensemble cast. The blend of significant technical achievement, careful character balancing, and genuine off-screen camaraderie among its stars all contributed to a production that, despite its many challenges, resulted in one of the most beloved and successful superhero films ever made. The light-hearted, playful energy that so often characterized life behind the scenes translated directly into the chemistry audiences saw on screen, proving that the bonds formed during those long months of filming were just as important to the film's success as its impressive budget and technical achievements. The Avengers, 2012, Cultural and Historical Impact. Welcome back to Review and Facts. Today we are taking a deep and thoughtful look into the cultural and historical significance of The Avengers, a film that did far more than simply entertain audiences for 2.5 hours. This movie fundamentally changed the trajectory of the entertainment industry, altered the way studios approached franchise filmmaking, and left a lasting impact on popular culture that continues to be felt more than a decade after its original release. To truly understand why this film matters so much, we need to look beyond its box office numbers and examine the broader context surrounding its release, the risks it represented, and the lasting influence it has had on cinema as a whole. To appreciate the cultural significance of The Avengers, we first need to understand just how unprecedented this project truly was at the time of its release. Prior to 2012, the idea of building an entire cinematic universe out of individual superhero films, each existing as its own standalone story while simultaneously contributing to a larger, interconnected narrative, had never been successfully attempted on this scale. Comic books had long used crossover storytelling as a way to bring different characters together, but translating that concept into a shared cinematic universe involving multiple separate film franchises, each with their own directors, casts, and studios, was considered an enormous financial and creative risk. Marvel Studios began laying the groundwork for this ambitious experiment years earlier, starting with the release of Iron Man in 2008, followed by a series of interconnected films that included The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, and Captain America, the First Avenger. Each of these films quietly planted narrative seeds, often through post-credit scenes, hinting at a larger story that was still being carefully assembled behind the scenes. This method of long-term, patient franchise building was almost entirely unprecedented within Hollywood at the time, and many industry analysts and film critics were openly skeptical about whether audiences would actually respond to such an ambitious and interconnected approach to storytelling. When The Avengers was finally released in 2012, it did not simply meet expectations, it completely shattered them, both critically and commercially. The film became a massive global phenomenon, breaking numerous box office records and proving definitively that audiences were not only willing to embrace interconnected storytelling, but were genuinely excited by the concept of watching multiple beloved characters interact within a single narrative. This success fundamentally validated Marvel Studios' entire long-term strategy, transforming what had once been considered an enormous gamble into one of the most influential and profitable business models in the history of modern cinema. The success of the Avengers effectively proved that shared cinematic universes could work, sparking an industry-wide shift as numerous other studios began attempting to replicate this same interconnected approach with their own properties, though very few would ever achieve the same level of consistent success that Marvel Studios managed to sustain over the following decade. Beyond its immediate financial success, The Avengers also played a significant role in reshaping cultural perceptions of superhero films as a genre. Prior to this era, superhero movies, while certainly popular, were often viewed by mainstream critics and general audiences as a somewhat niche or juvenile form of entertainment, frequently dismissed as simplistic spectacle lacking genuine artistic or narrative depth. The Avengers, along with the broader Marvel Cinematic Universe it represented, played a crucial role in shifting this perception, demonstrating that superhero storytelling could successfully blend large-scale spectacle with genuine character development, emotional depth, and thematic complexity. The film's careful balancing of humor, action, and emotional stakes helped elevate the genre in the eyes of both critics and casual audiences, contributing to a broader cultural shift in which superhero films increasingly became viewed as legitimate, artistically respectable forms of mainstream entertainment rather than purely disposable blockbuster spectacle. The cultural impact of The Avengers also extended significantly into how audiences engaged with franchise filmmaking as a whole. Prior to this film's release, movie franchises typically followed a much more straightforward, sequential structure, with each film existing primarily as a direct continuation of the story established in its immediate predecessor. The Avengers introduced a far more complex and rewarding form of audience engagement, encouraging viewers to actively follow multiple interconnected storylines across several different film franchises simultaneously, piecing together a larger overarching narrative through careful attention to detail, recurring characters, and subtle connections between individual films. This approach fundamentally changed how audiences consumed blockbuster cinema, fostering a new culture of dedicated fandom built around theory crafting, close analysis of post-credit scenes, and enthusiastic anticipation for how seemingly separate storylines might eventually converge. This heightened level of audience engagement became a defining characteristic of modern blockbuster filmmaking, with numerous other franchises attempting to replicate this same sense of interconnected anticipation in the years that followed. The film also holds significant historical importance within the broader context of Hollywood's ongoing relationship with comic book source material. While comic book adaptations had certainly existed for decades prior to The Avengers, This film represented a turning point in how faithfully and ambitiously studios were willing to translate complex comic book storytelling conventions onto the big screen. The very concept of an ensemble superhero team-up, a storytelling device that had long been a staple of comic book publishing, had never before been attempted with this level of scale, ambition, and financial investment within mainstream cinema. The success of the Avengers effectively proved that audiences were not only capable of following complex, interconnected superhero narratives, but were genuinely eager for this type of ambitious storytelling, encouraging future adaptations to more closely honor the intricate, interconnected nature of their original comic book source material rather than simplifying these stories for the sake of standalone accessibility. Another important aspect of the film's cultural significance lies in how it reshaped the business and marketing strategies employed throughout the broader entertainment industry. The unprecedented success of the Avengers demonstrated the immense value of long-term franchise planning, encouraging studios across Hollywood to begin thinking well beyond individual films, instead focusing on building expansive, multi-year content strategies designed to sustain audience engagement across numerous interconnected releases. This shift had far-reaching consequences throughout the industry, influencing not only other film studios but also television production, streaming services, and even video game development, as numerous companies began adopting similar interconnected universe strategies in an attempt to replicate Marvel's remarkable success. While many of these attempts ultimately struggled to match the careful, patient execution that made Marvel's approach so successful, the widespread adoption of this business model across the entertainment industry stands as a direct testament to just how influential the Avengers truly became following its release. The film's success also had a significant and lasting impact on the careers of its lead actors, many of whom experienced dramatic increases in both fame and career opportunities following the film's release. Robert Downey Jr., already experiencing a career resurgence following his earlier work in Iron Man, saw his global fame reach unprecedented heights, becoming one of the highest-paid and most recognizable actors in the world throughout the following decade. Similarly, actors like Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, and Scarlett Johansson each experienced significant career elevation, becoming inseparably associated with their respective characters in the eyes of global audiences for years to come. This phenomenon extended beyond individual career trajectories, contributing to a broader cultural shift in which appearing within a major interconnected franchise became an increasingly desirable and prestigious opportunity for actors, a significant departure from earlier eras in which many respected performers viewed blockbuster franchise filmmaking with a degree of artistic skepticism. From a broader historical perspective, the Avengers also arrived during a particularly interesting period within the global entertainment landscape, a time when international box office markets, particularly in regions such as China and other parts of Asia, were rapidly growing in both size and financial importance. The massive global success of the Avengers helped further encourage Hollywood studios to increasingly prioritize international audiences when developing and marketing major blockbuster releases, recognizing the immense financial potential of crafting films with broad, cross-cultural appeal. This shift toward prioritizing global audiences became an increasingly defining characteristic of blockbuster filmmaking throughout the following decade, with the Avengers often cited as one of the earliest and most influential examples of a film successfully achieving massive, sustained box office success across numerous international markets simultaneously. The cultural conversation surrounding the Avengers also touched on interesting themes related to collective heroism and cooperative problem-solving, themes that resonated strongly with audiences during a period marked by significant global uncertainty and economic recovery following the financial crisis of the late 2000s. The film's central narrative, focusing on the necessity of setting aside personal ego and individual ambition in favor of collective cooperation and shared sacrifice, struck a particularly resonant chord with audiences navigating a world still grappling with the aftermath of significant economic and social upheaval. Many cultural commentators at the time noted that the film's emphasis on unity, sacrifice, and collective strength in the face of overwhelming external threats reflected broader societal desires for cooperation and resilience during a period marked by considerable uncertainty and division. The film also played a notable role in further popularizing and normalizing certain elements of science fiction and fantasy storytelling within mainstream entertainment. Concepts such as alternate realms, extraterrestrial invasions, and technologically advanced weaponry, once considered relatively niche elements primarily associated with dedicated science fiction fandoms, became significantly more mainstream and culturally accepted following the widespread success of the Avengers and the broader Marvel Cinematic Universe it helped establish. This broader acceptance of fantastical storytelling elements within mainstream blockbuster cinema paved the way for numerous other ambitious science fiction and fantasy projects throughout the following decade, further blurring the once rigid boundaries between niche genre entertainment and mainstream cultural relevance. Additionally, the Avengers hold significant historical importance as an early and highly influential example of successful transmedia storytelling, a term used to describe narratives that unfold across multiple different forms of media simultaneously. Beyond the films themselves, Marvel Studios began increasingly incorporating television series, digital content, and various promotional materials designed to further expand and enrich the overarching narrative established within the core films. The Avengers played a crucial role in demonstrating the commercial viability of this expansive, multi-platform storytelling approach, encouraging further investment and experimentation with transmedia storytelling techniques throughout the broader entertainment industry in the years that followed. The film's legacy also extends into how it influenced audience expectations regarding cinematic spectacle and large-scale visual effects. The climactic battle sequence within the Avengers, involving a massive alien invasion within a fully realized urban environment, set a new standard for large-scale action choreography within blockbuster filmmaking, combining practical effects, extensive visual effects work, and carefully coordinated ensemble action sequences on a scale rarely attempted previously. This heightened standard for visual spectacle significantly influenced subsequent blockbuster productions, encouraging studios to continually push the boundaries of large-scale action filmmaking in an effort to meet increasingly heightened audience expectations following the release of The Avengers. Furthermore, The Avengers holds an important place within the broader historical narrative of Hollywood's evolving relationship with digital and streaming technology. While the film itself was primarily a theatrical release, its massive success significantly influenced how studios approach long-term content planning during a period when digital distribution and streaming technology were beginning to rapidly reshape the broader entertainment landscape. The interconnected, long-term storytelling approach popularized by the Avengers proved particularly well suited to the emerging streaming era, as numerous studios began recognizing the potential value of expansive, interconnected content libraries capable of sustaining long-term audience engagement across multiple platforms and formats. From a purely historical standpoint, The Avengers will likely always be remembered as a defining moment in modern cinematic history, a film that took an enormous creative and financial risk by attempting something that had never been successfully accomplished before on such a massive scale. Its overwhelming success fundamentally reshaped the strategic direction of Hollywood filmmaking, influencing not only Marvel Studios' own future projects, but the broader industry's approach to franchise development, audience engagement, and long-term content planning for well over a decade following its release. The film's lasting cultural impact extends far beyond its immediate commercial success, having played a crucial role in reshaping how audiences engage with blockbuster cinema, how studios approach long-term franchise planning, and how the broader entertainment industry continues to evolve in response to changing audience expectations and technological advancements. In many ways, The Avengers represents a pivotal turning point not just for Marvel Studios, but for the entire landscape of modern popular culture. It demonstrated that patient, carefully planned storytelling, built gradually over multiple interconnected films, could result in a level of audience investment and emotional payoff rarely achieved through more traditional, stand-alone blockbuster filmmaking. This patient approach to long-term narrative construction fundamentally altered industry expectations, encouraging studios across Hollywood to think more ambitiously and more patiently about long-term franchise development, a shift whose influence remains clearly visible throughout the broader entertainment industry to this day. The Avengers, a film so massive, so influential, and so carefully constructed that it is easy to forget just how many strange contradictions and quiet ironies sit underneath its surface. Every blockbuster carries some gap between the story it tells on screen and the reality of how that story came to exist, but with the Avengers, these gaps are unusually rich, unusually layered, and unusually revealing about the industry, the culture, and the era that produced it. This is a long and detailed exploration, so settle in, because we are going to walk through every major irony we can find, from the boardroom decisions that made the film possible to the way audiences eventually related to its characters in ways the filmmakers themselves probably never fully anticipated. Let us begin with the most fundamental irony of all, the one baked directly into the premise of the film itself. The Avengers tells a story about individuals who do not trust each other, who clash over ego, method, and philosophy, and who must learn, often painfully, to set aside their personal pride in order to survive a threat too large for any one of them to handle alone. This is presented as a difficult and hard-won transformation within the story. And yet, this exact transformation had to happen behind the scenes, at a corporate and industrial level, long before a single frame of the film was shot. Marvel Studios had to convince multiple separate film franchises, each with its own creative direction, its own fanbase, its own internal expectations, and its own financial stakes, to subordinate themselves to a single unifying vision. Iron Man was its own successful franchise. Thor was its own mythological universe. Captain America existed in its own historical setting. The Hulk had already failed once at the box office and needed careful handling to avoid repeating that failure. Getting these separate pieces to align into a single cohesive story required an enormous amount of internal negotiation, patience, and trust, the very same qualities the film dramatizes its heroes learning to develop with one another. In other words, the making of the Avengers was, in a very real sense, its own version of the Avengers Initiative, a group of powerful, independent entities being brought together under one banner because no single one of them alone could achieve what the combination could achieve. The irony is almost too neat. A film about learning to trust your teammates was itself only possible because an entire industry had to learn to trust each other first. From there, we move to one of the richest ironies involving the film's lead actor. Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark is a character defined by supreme confidence, unshakable self-belief, and a public image built around competence and control. He is a man audiences are meant to believe can solve almost any problem through sheer intelligence and force of will. The irony is that the actor cast to play this character had spent years being treated by the film industry as one of the least reliable, least trustworthy performers working, not because of a lack of talent, but because of a well-documented history of personal struggles that made him, quite literally, uninsurable for major studio productions. Insurance companies would not back films that cast him, meaning that for a period of years, Downey's immense acting talent was rendered almost irrelevant to major studios simply because the financial risk of hiring him was considered too high. This means that the actor who plays the single most confident, capable, and untouchable character in the entire franchise was, in real professional terms, once considered one of the biggest liabilities in Hollywood. The redemption arc that eventually allowed Downey to reclaim his career mirrors, almost beat for beat, the kind of redemption story so often celebrated within the fictional narratives he now stars in. And yet audiences watching Tony Stark's swagger and self-assurance on screen rarely stop to consider that the man delivering those lines had lived through the exact opposite experience just years before stepping into the role. There is a related irony here too, involving how thoroughly Downey and Stark became fused in the public imagination. The Avengers, as a title and as a concept, was explicitly designed around the idea of an ensemble, a team of equals, none more important than the others, each contributing something the others could not provide alone. This was a deliberate structural choice, and a great deal of care went into ensuring that Captain America, Thor, Black Widow, Hawkeye, and the Hulk all received meaningful screen time and narrative weight. And yet, despite all of this careful balancing, popular culture very quickly collapsed the entire franchise around a single figure. For years following the film's release, casual audiences who had not closely followed the broader franchise would often refer to it informally simply as the Iron Man movies, even when discussing entries in which Iron Man barely appeared or did not appear at all. This is a strange and quietly ironic outcome for a franchise whose entire founding philosophy was that no single hero, however powerful or charismatic, should be allowed to overshadow the collective. The film's own marketing, story structure, and internal politics were built around equality among heroes, yet the culture that consumed it kept gravitating back toward a hierarchy with one man standing above the rest. Now let us turn to Loki, whose ironic cultural journey may be even more surprising than Stark's. Loki's entire ideological position within the film rests on a specific and quite bleak view of humanity, the idea that people do not actually want freedom, that they crave order, structure, and rule, even if that rule comes through domination rather than consent. He delivers this philosophy directly to a crowd of kneeling civilians in one of the film's most quoted scenes, framing submission as something people secretly desire deep down. The film positions this worldview as something audiences are meant to reject, part of what makes Loki a villain rather than a hero. And yet, in one of the most striking ironies of the entire franchise, audiences did not reject Loki at all. They embraced him. He became, almost immediately, one of the most beloved characters in the franchise, adored not despite his manipulative, domineering philosophy but often because of the charisma, wit, and tragic complexity with which it was delivered. Fans wrote extensively about wanting to understand him, sympathize with him, even root for him, despite a character arc explicitly built to demonstrate why his worldview was wrong. In effect, a villain constructed specifically to embody an idea the film wanted audiences to reject became one of the most celebrated and requested characters in the very franchise built to argue against him. There is something almost self-defeating and yet completely fascinating about a story that spends its runtime demonstrating why control and domination are wrong, only for the face of that very philosophy to become one of the most merchandised, most beloved figures the franchise ever produced. Sticking with Loki for a moment longer, there is a smaller but equally interesting irony buried in the casting process itself. Tom Hiddleston did not originally audition for the role of Loki. He auditioned for Thor, the golden, heroic, physically imposing lead of that earlier film, believing himself suited to play the noble warrior rather than the scheming outcast. It was only through the director's judgment that Hiddleston was redirected toward Loki instead, a character defined by insecurity, resentment, and a desperate need for approval rather than natural heroic confidence. The irony here is quiet but meaningful. An actor who initially saw himself as fit for golden, effortless heroism ended up finding his greatest and most career-defining success by playing the exact opposite, a character whose entire identity is built around never quite measuring up to that same golden ideal. In a strange way, Hiddleston's own professional journey, being redirected away from the role he wanted and toward the role that made him a star, mirrors Loki's own narrative arc of being denied the path he believed was his birthright, only to find a different, ultimately more compelling kind of significance elsewhere. Now let us look at Chris Evans, whose relationship with Captain America carries its own layer of quiet irony. Steve Rogers is written as a character almost entirely without self-doubt when it comes to public duty, a man who steps into the spotlight, accepts the weight of being watched, admired, and depended upon by millions of people, and does so without visible hesitation. He is, narratively speaking, the character most comfortable being a symbol. Off-screen, however, Evans has been notably candid about his own discomfort with fame and public attention, describing real anxiety around the scale of visibility that came with taking on such an iconic role. He has spoken about hesitating before accepting the part specifically because of how permanently it would attach his identity to public life on a massive scale. The irony is almost poetic. The actor most associated with a character who wears the responsibility of being watched and admired as easily as a uniform was, in his private reality, one of the cast members most uneasy about exactly that kind of exposure. Steve Rogers never flinches at being looked to as a symbol. The man playing him very much did. There is also an irony embedded in the film's treatment of trust in institutions, particularly through the character of Nick Fury and the organization he leads, S.H.I.E.L.D. Throughout the Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D. is presented as a secretive but fundamentally trustworthy authority, an organization with access to extraordinary technology, extraordinary secrecy, and extraordinary power, all of which the film asks audiences to accept as being wielded responsibly in humanity's best interest. Nick Fury himself is framed as a flawed but ultimately honorable leader, someone willing to make difficult decisions but never someone whose fundamental loyalty is in question. This portrayal landed within a broader cultural moment where public skepticism toward large institutions, particularly those operating with secrecy and minimal oversight, was already beginning to grow. The irony deepens significantly when later entries within the same franchise reveal that this very organization had, in fact, been compromised from within for a very long time, its infrastructure quietly infiltrated by a hostile ideological faction operating undetected for decades. Watching the Avengers today, knowing what later films eventually reveal about the true nature of S.H.I.E.L.D., adds a layer of dramatic irony that the original 2012 audience could not have possessed. The organization the film asks us to trust without much hesitation would later be exposed as having been rotten at its foundation the entire time, making the earlier film's relatively uncomplicated trust in institutional authority feel, in hindsight, almost quaint. Another rich irony involves the film's climactic battle sequence and the broader cultural context surrounding large-scale, city-based destruction as entertainment. The Avengers built its emotional and visual climax around an alien invasion tearing through the middle of a densely populated American city, complete with collapsing buildings, panicked crowds, and widespread urban devastation, all crafted specifically to thrill audiences. This kind of imagery, skyscrapers under siege, streets filled with fleeing civilians, had to be handled with real sensitivity by the filmmakers, given how recent and painful certain real-world tragedies still were in the broader cultural memory at the time. Studios throughout this era were often careful about which specific visual choices they allowed into these sequences, deliberately avoiding certain angles, certain building silhouettes, certain framing choices that might feel too close to real-world trauma rather than fictional spectacle. The irony is that a film built almost entirely around the thrill of city-wide destruction had to work quietly and carefully behind the scenes to make sure that same destruction felt like escapist entertainment rather than something uncomfortably real, walking a line between spectacle and sensitivity that most audiences watching the finished film never even noticed was being managed at all. There is also an interesting irony surrounding the film's treatment of collective heroism landing at a moment of significant individual economic hardship. The Avengers arrived in theaters only a few years removed from a major global financial crisis, a period defined by widespread economic anxiety, job loss, and a cultural mood increasingly skeptical of large institutions, whether financial, governmental, or corporate. Into this environment stepped a film whose central message was fundamentally about collective sacrifice, cooperation, and the idea that individual heroes must set aside personal ambition for the good of the whole. This message resonated powerfully with audiences navigating real-world uncertainty. And yet, ironically, the film itself was made possible by one of the most calculated, long-term corporate financial strategies in the history of the entertainment industry. A strategy built not around collective altruism but around years of careful franchise planning explicitly designed to maximize long-term commercial return. A film celebrating selflessness and collective sacrifice was, at its core, one of the most successful examples of calculated corporate long-term planning ever executed within Hollywood. The emotional message on screen and the financial machinery behind the screen were, in some sense, pointed in almost opposite directions. Let us also examine the irony embedded in Mark Ruffalo's casting and performance as Bruce Banner and the Hulk. Ruffalo took on a role that had already been recast once before, following an earlier, less successful cinematic attempt to bring the character to the screen. The Hulk, prior to the Avengers, was widely regarded within the industry as one of the most difficult characters in the entire Marvel roster to translate successfully to film, a character whose blend of restrained intelligence and uncontrollable rage had proven notoriously difficult to balance convincingly. Ruffalo, an actor known throughout his career for calm, understated, emotionally internal performances rather than explosive physicality, seemed on paper like an unusual choice to finally solve this long-standing problem. And yet it was precisely this quiet, internalized quality that allowed him to succeed where louder, more overtly intense approaches had previously struggled. The irony here is that the actor least associated with explosive physical intensity ended up delivering the performance that finally cracked one of the most explosively physical characters in the entire franchise, largely by focusing not on the rage itself, but on the quiet, controlled suppression of it. There is also a subtler irony surrounding Jeremy Renner's role as Hawkeye, a character whose entire narrative function within the film's first half is built around the absence of free will. For a significant portion of the story, Hawkeye is not truly present as a character at all, but rather a vessel controlled entirely by Loki, stripped of his own agency and turned into a weapon against the very people he would otherwise be fighting alongside. The irony is that an actor who had, just years earlier, broken through in Hollywood specifically through a critically acclaimed performance built around raw, commanding personal agency and intensity, was now asked, in his highest-profile film role to date, to spend much of his screen time portraying someone with no agency at all. Renner's Hawkeye essentially becomes a supporting figure to his own mind control for much of the film, only reclaiming the very qualities that made Renner a respected actor in the first place once the character breaks free later in the story. Now consider the irony surrounding Agent Phil Coulson, a character with no superhuman abilities whatsoever, no armor, no godly strength, no gamma radiation, standing alongside a team of literal gods, super soldiers, and armored geniuses. Coulson's death at the hands of Loki becomes the single most emotionally pivotal moment of the entire film, the event that finally forces the team to set aside their egos and unite. In a story overflowing with extraordinary power, it is the ordinary, unpowered human who ends up carrying the greatest emotional weight of the entire narrative. There is something quietly ironic about a film filled with gods and monsters ultimately being emotionally anchored by the most human, most vulnerable character in the entire cast, a reminder that within a story about extraordinary beings, it was the ordinary person's sacrifice that mattered most to both the characters and the audience. Let us also look at the irony surrounding the now legendary shawarma scene that plays during the film's mid-credits sequence. This scene, filmed quickly and somewhat informally after principal photography had already wrapped, was never part of the original planned shoot. It exists almost as an afterthought, a small, low-stakes, dialogue-free moment of the team simply sitting together eating in silence. And yet this brief, unplanned, almost throwaway scene became one of the most beloved and frequently referenced moments of the entire film, arguably more culturally memorable to casual audiences than several of the film's massive, expensive, meticulously planned action sequences. A movie built around a budget of well over $200 million, filled with elaborate visual effects and carefully choreographed battles, ended up being partly defined in popular memory by a cheap, quiet, almost accidental scene of exhausted heroes eating fast food in silence. There is something wonderfully ironic about the fact that one of the most enduring images from such an enormous blockbuster production is not an explosion or a superpowered clash, but 6 tired people quietly sharing a meal. Widening the lens further, there is an important industry-level irony worth exploring involving how the rest of Hollywood responded to the success of the Avengers. The film succeeded specifically because Marvel Studios had spent years patiently building toward this moment, carefully releasing individual films, allowing audiences time to grow familiar with each character before finally bringing them together. This patience was, in many ways, the entire secret to the film's success, a slow, deliberate, carefully sequenced approach rather than a rushed attempt to force a shared universe into existence overnight. And yet, in the years following the film's massive success, numerous competing studios responded by attempting to replicate the result while ignoring the process that actually produced it. Rather than spending years patiently building individual foundations before attempting a crossover, many competitors instead tried to announce and construct entire shared universes almost immediately, often before even a single successful standalone film had been released to justify the effort. This resulted in a wave of rushed, hastily assembled attempts at shared universe storytelling throughout the following decade, many of which failed specifically because they skipped the patient groundwork that made the Avengers possible in the first place. The industry learned the wrong lesson from an extraordinarily right example, chasing the destination while ignoring the road that actually led there. There is also an irony worth noting in how the film's massive success altered audience relationships with the very idea of spoilers and secrecy. The Avengers arrived at a cultural moment when the internet was rapidly transforming how audiences discussed and anticipated major releases, and the film's carefully guarded plot details, character appearances, and post-credit scenes became objects of intense public speculation and protection. A film about a team assembled to stop a secret plan from being executed became, in its own marketing and cultural rollout, an elaborate exercise in secrecy and controlled information, with studios and audiences alike treating plot details with almost the same level of protective seriousness that the fictional S.H.I.E.L.D. treated its own classified operations within the story itself. Life imitated the story's own paranoia about information control in a way few involved likely anticipated at the time. Finally, let us consider one last broad and somewhat bittersweet irony tied to the film's legacy as a whole. The Avengers succeeded so completely, so thoroughly, that it fundamentally reshaped audience expectations for what a single film could or should accomplish. Prior to this film, blockbuster movies were largely expected to function as self-contained experiences, satisfying on their own terms without requiring extensive outside context. After the Avengers, audiences increasingly expected every major blockbuster to exist as part of something larger, connected to other films, hinting at future installments, rewarding long-term investment rather than stand-alone viewing. This shift, directly caused by the overwhelming success of the Avengers, arguably made it harder for future standalone blockbuster films with no franchise ambitions at all, to capture the same level of cultural attention and box office success that had once been entirely normal before this film redefined audience expectations. In helping to perfect the interconnected blockbuster, the Avengers may have quietly contributed to making the traditional standalone blockbuster a much harder sell for the following decade, an unintended side effect of its own overwhelming success. Taken together, these ironies paint a fascinating picture of a film far more complicated, far more layered, and far more culturally revealing than its surface-level reputation as a fun, spectacular team-up movie might suggest. The Avengers is, in many ways, a story about learning to trust despite difference, made possible by an industry that had to learn the exact same lesson behind the scenes. It is a film that argued against domination through a villain audiences ended up adoring. It is a story anchored emotionally by its most powerless character, remembered fondly for its cheapest, quietest scene, and misunderstood by an entire industry that tried to copy its results without ever replicating its patience. These contradictions do not diminish the film's achievement. If anything, they deepen it, revealing just how much genuine complexity, both intentional and accidental, was woven into a film so many casual viewers remember simply as an exciting superhero team-up. That brings us to the end of this detailed exploration of the ironic cultural details surrounding the Avengers. If you enjoyed this deeper, more unexpected look into the contradictions hidden beneath one of the most successful films in modern cinema history, make sure you like this video, share it with fellow movie fans, and subscribe to Review and Facts for more detailed breakdowns just like this one.